So welcome to Partner Up Partnerships Podcast. All right, we're live.
And I was like, I have all these questions to ask.
The thing that matters in a partnership is the trust and sacrifice.
Composing, building software that works for you. Official.
Yeah, super official countdown as we kind of get acquainted here. So welcome to Partner Up. Howdy, folks. Kevin, what is going on in San Francisco right now?
Oh, I mean, we're experiencing a lot of fires out here. And so Christina and I, if we look out our windows, it's there's a layer of smoke that's covering the sun. So it looks like Mars outside today.
So
yeah, I liken it to Total Recall.
Yeah.
Total Recall. Okay, wow. I don't know if we can use that as a topic for today's conversation. Well, Christina, thank you so much for joining us. Before we hop into the intro, just a friendly reminder for everyone to leave us a rating on your favorite podcast network. 5 stars only, 6 stars if you can't get that button to work. Just keep on pressing past 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that this episode is sponsored by Crossbeam. Crossbeam is a partner ecosystem platform that acts as a data escrow service that finds overlapping customers and prospects with your partners while keeping the rest of your data private and secure. You can sign up for free at crossbeam.com. So with that, Kevin, who's our esteemed guest that we're going to be talking to today?
Yeah. So our guest today is Cristina Cordova. Christina has a pretty illustrious background, I would say. You've spent over 7 years at Stripe in a BD partnerships role. Prior to that, you were at Pulse for a couple of years before it got acquired by LinkedIn in 2013, I believe. And you're at Notion now. I think was it April when Notion raised $50 million at a $2 billion valuation?
Pretty much, yeah. Right as I joined. Yeah, it's been an exciting few months for us. We've been able to, kind of ride off of that straight into more COVID times, and certainly into thinking just a lot more about how we can use that funding to bring about new products like our API, new partnerships, new product features, all those kinds of things.
Did you join?
Sure.
I have to ask, did you join before the strike price changed?
That is a great question. No, unfortunately. So I had kind of like a long transition period between Stripe and Notion, just because I wanted to make sure that the products that I was leading at Stripe at the time were in really good hands. And Stripe had obviously just started to go through COVID itself, and it was just a lot of time for change in the company. And so I ended up joining a little later, which meant I didn't join until after the official round closed.
So besides the remote nature of how you're now forced to work, how has Notion been impacted by COVID? I'm curious.
Yeah, I would say in a couple ways. So one, I think a lot of companies these days are thinking a lot more about how they can facilitate remote work and do that in a way where people can find all the information that they need to run their business in an efficient way. So being able to pass information through your company in the old-fashioned way of just I'll walk in and ask someone about this or something like that just doesn't really fly anymore. And you kind of need to just document everything within your company. So I think we're very much kind of riding that wave with a lot of folks. So that's where we see just a ton of more usage and signups on the kind of enterprise side of our business. And then the other half would be among personal usage. So a lot of folks using Notion for things like note taking, or we have this big thing for back to school right now. So how to create your own kind of custom school workspace for students and all those kinds of things. I think just people need many different ways to get organized and use the product in ways that we hadn't really anticipated before. So we're just seeing a lot of new and interesting use cases. And the great thing about Notion is that you can take a lot of those use cases, make them into templates, and then other people can build off of them, which is really exciting.
Is Notion kind of like a starter product for companies that are transitioning or like forced to transition from mostly offline and now looking at having like an online strategy? Is Notion one of the first tools that they would sign up for? Are you seeing a rush of people from that wave?
I would say a lot of folks who are signing up for Notion for the first time are not necessarily like new to like the world of online collaboration in a way. So they're typically using other online services and find that all their information is kind of all over the place, and they needed to centralize it all in one place. So that's, I would say, the biggest thing. It's not as if someone's moving from, like, let's say, pen and paper to Notion. And we are seeing people use, some combination of, 5, 6 services and coming to us and saying, oh, actually, I can do notes, wiki, project management, bug tracking,
Sure.
just everything, kind of all in one place. And then I don't need to be able to, I don't have to buy all of these separate SaaS services and then kind of cobble them together because, as we all know, they don't work necessarily as nicely as you would like, often because a lot of these companies don't tend to partner as much as they should.
Sure. So you're working on partnerships there. What does that mean? What are some of the things that you're working on?
Yeah, so I lead our partnership and platform initiatives. So I would say it's kind of like a hybrid role between product and so very much internally facing with its own kind of engineering team, all the way to the external facing component. And that's really where I like to spend my time. So I don't want to be fully external or fully internal. I really like to spend time with customers, partners, anyone who wants to get kind of value out of the product in ways that they're unable to today, and figure out what are the right solutions for that.
Right.
So the big thing that we're working on right now is the first version of our API. So that will enable partners as well as customers to programmatically import, update content, programmatically export content, integrate Notion into all the different services that they use to run their business or run their lives. And we've seen just a ton of folks, both, just personal users who want to use Notion in like a unique way, whether it's, something simple like, oh, they want a custom domain, or they want to use Notion as like kind of this like headless CMS, all the way to how can they integrate Notion with Slack in a way that will enable them to do their jobs better, communicate with their team better in a more efficient way. And so it's a combination of how can we work with customers who want to use the API, mostly for enterprise use cases, I would say. And then second, how can we work with partners? So typically other like SaaS service providers, thinking about how Notion and their software service can work really closely together. So building out that API and then kind of representing Notion externally and working with a lot of our kind of beta partners right now.
So this is interesting. So Stripe, I mean, API centric company, right? Like pretty much everything API, and developer centric to a degree that I don't know any other company that had risen to Stripe's, kind of acclaim in terms of developer centricity, at least in recent memory. And then to Notion, where you're developing the API for the first time. I think one of the things Kevin reached, we were chatting about was like, how do you take that experience and like, for those folks that are starting to transition from like one partner role to the next and the vast wealth of experience you have with API ecosystems at Stripe, talk to us a little bit about how you're thinking about like that experience from Stripe translating into, Notion.
Yeah, it's funny. I think when I left my, kind of the job I had before Stripe, I was telling everyone where I was going, kind of joining this payments company. And I was working primarily with media companies at the time. And all the partners I was working with were like, okay, well, probably never talk to you again, but see ya. Like none of that work really kind of nicely translated into the next role. And what was funny is that a bunch of those publishers ended up reaching out to me over the kind of lifetime, that I was at Stripe, and said, "Oh, like we're actually building like a new way to do paid subscription models, or other kind of like micro payments with journalism, or like those kinds of things." And it actually translated more than I think I would have thought, even if you just look at it on face, content not necessarily having much to do with APIs. And I think in moving from a company that is API only or API first, like Stripe, to a company like Notion, which doesn't yet have an API, I think I look at it as a really unique challenge. I think a lot of companies that add an API on kind of after the fact tend to not necessarily have as great of a developer ecosystem as the companies that are, very much API first. And it can be a lot harder to just get interest in having people develop with the API. So I've talked to other folks on the BD side, as well as on more kind of like developer advocacy, developer evangelism roles, where they want to be part of like an API first or API only type of company. I think the thing that's different about Notion is that it is basically our number one feature request. So whether it's customers who use us for personal use cases, enterprise use cases, et cetera, they all really want the API. So the thing that's really exciting is that the API is both a deliver what the customer wants, like build this feature type of product, as well as a product that enables us to significantly expand the ecosystem that we're in. So right now, we don't really kind of nicely work with a bunch of other software services. You can embed content really neatly within our service, and you can import content from a few providers that we've decided to work with, but that's pretty much it. And Notion kind of stays as, Notion is. And I think the thing that's really exciting about the API with Notion is that, we really cater our product to tool makers. So if you think about all the different features of Notion, whether it's like databases, page content, et cetera, the way we like to think about it is that there are a bunch of kind of different Lego blocks. And you, as the person who's writing, composing, building on Notion, in a very non-technical way, can bring those different Legos together in building kind of software that works for you, rather than trying to adopt a piece of software that you can't really change and mold to your needs. And that's really the heart of the API as well, right? The API gives developers that ability to change software, make it adapt to their own needs, and do it in a technical way versus a non-technical way. So I'm really excited to kind of translate the mission of Notion from a non-technical perspective into something that works for developers and software services out there.
So I'm really curious, how much of your role is working externally with partners, and then how much of it is working internally with, I assume, like product managers to like open up these surfaces and these endpoints?
Yeah. So I would love to say we have product managers,
Okay.
but we don't yet. So we're just starting to hire our very first kind of full-time product person. So
Okay. So who's
I
in
would
charge
say,
then of who's in charge then of opening up those? Who are kind of the stakeholders of opening up the APIs?
yeah. So I work directly with right now an engineering team.
Okay.
So like an eng lead and individual contributors on the engineering side, and we meet daily in our lovely Zoom stand-ups these days. Really thinking through, what are the things that we need to do to get closer and closer to delivering the API to our first beta users and then releasing it publicly. And so in a way, I act as like, a quasi product person, right? I'm working internally with that team, and I'm the only one of us that is going out there and speaking to the outside world to get feedback, fully understand what the different use cases are for the API, et cetera, and then coming back to the engineering team and saying, okay, here's what we're being told, here's what customers need, here's what partners need. And so I would say I'm spending my time probably about 50-50 internal versus external. Right now, we're in a pretty heavy customer development phase. So it's a little heavier kind of on the external side. But as we release the API and then start continuing to build, I think that external side will kind of continue to go up. To date, it's been very, very internal just because we're at such like the early kind of foundational stages of building the API, that it's been a lot of just like, hiring engineers to build out the team to build the API, a lot of those kinds of things.
Cool. So are your KPIs more weighted towards acquiring new customers through platform partnerships, or are they, or more retention of existing customers because you're satisfying like an integration need, or how are your KPIs weighted?
Yeah, so I would say it's both of those. So, one, there are customers who don't want to use Notion right now because we don't have an API. So for them, it's like, they need to check the box. And so we need to deliver on an API that will check that box for them, and making sure that there's, not a single customer who chooses to not use our product because of the API. Second, retention. So there are a lot of users who are certainly aware that we're working on the API and are, sticking with us because they know we're working on it. And so we really very much need to deliver for them. And then last, and this is certainly not least, it's not just about the direct customers who want or that will keep as a result of having the API. It's also about all of the developers out there who may not be like direct customers, but are building integrations for our customers. So we're also looking to, drastically increase the number of integrations that exist out there, the number of different things that people are building. As an example, I see on Product Hunt, which I check every few days, just like what are the latest and greatest kind of like Notion integrations that people are putting up there, in kind of unofficial ways of using Notion. And how can we rapidly increase that? Because I think if you have a lot of developers and people who are building either for themselves and saying, oh, maybe I want to open source this or make it available to other folks, or they're saying, I want to actually build this integration and sell it. I think that's a really fantastic ecosystem to build. If you look at, let's say, the Apple App Store, right? It's not just about, the 30% that Apple is getting, right? It's the fact that, by far, you can certainly say that Apple has the best applications in and of themselves, compared to any other service out there. And that adds to the value of your phone. And so I look at it as, each and every single fantastic integration that is built on top of Notion makes the Notion product more valuable. And so for me, it's about trying to make sure that there are more and more great integrations out there, that we build a developer community with thousands of developers who are part of it. So those are all kind of KPIs that we'll stick to, that will be, indicators that what we're doing from an ecosystem perspective is working for our customers.
It's such an ideal signal when you start seeing integrations being built and launched on Product Hunt. That's a wonderful thing to see.
Yeah.
I have so many questions.
For sure.
This is such a fascinating topic. I love build the app exchange, app stores, like the whole concept of platforms versus aggregators. It's a fantastic topic. Typically you need to have executive alignment around investing in this strategy. What does the org structure look like in terms of where you're strategically aligned inside of Notion today?
Yeah, so I report directly to our CEO, Ivan, and
how many people
I work
today?
We're about 70 today.
Okay, that's surprising,
and I joined
given
about 40.
how fast y'all are blowing up. I thought you had more already. Awesome.
I imagine you're hiring pretty aggressively right now.
Yeah, so when I joined in at the end of March, we were 40, just under 40 people. Now over 70. So, it's a lot of people for how small we were when I joined. So, the goal is to definitely grow pretty rapidly, but not so rapidly that you compromise in terms of culture
Right.
and other things that can be very difficult, especially in times like these where everyone's like onboarding remotely and everything like that.
And
But
we've all figured that
but
out,
yeah,
right? We've all figured out how to onboard remotely perfectly. It's like no one really has it figured out.
exactly. Everyone's experience is perfect.
Um,
So yeah, I work very closely with our CEO and then my peers like the head of engineering, for example, our head of marketing, etc.
I think that's so important. The reason why I ask is like, a lot of our audience is being tasked with building out, APIs. It's like, and they might report into other parts of the organization. I think that executive alignment is so important because your first phase is like, let's get traction and accelerate our community. How many developers are building? Are we solving customer problems? But that next phase you kind of hinted towards, which is, I want to know if you've done any research on this, but is there another ecosystem of like, I don't know how you kind of form your category. It's work productivity, right? Like you're kind of in the productivity suite. So Chrome obviously has a massive ecosystem, right? A gigantic ecosystem of developers for, Chrome being the central place. But Notion, you have a desktop app, right?
Mm-hmm.
And who are you looking to as your role models that like, hey, this is where the developers, or these are other companies that have built workplace, work productivity solutions that they've monetized, right? Like I could go in and build this app and sell it. So I've done that in Chrome. Where else have people done this in this, in the productivity space?
Yeah, I think in productivity, I don't necessarily think there's like a standout leader. I think
That's interesting.
let's say, yeah, in B2B or like enterprise SaaS, I think the most obvious one is probably Salesforce, right? With their App Exchange, and the fact that it does have similar building blocks in the idea of Salesforce is that you can customize it exactly to your needs. Are you a 50-person sales organization? Are you a 5,000-person sales organization, right? You're probably going to need different things, and you can customize the software to be able to do that. I think in their world, they operate very much in this kind of world of, Salesforce admins, right? You kind of need to potentially hire someone to help you customize the software in a way that works for you. And I think our hope with Notion is that you can customize the software yourself to your own needs without necessarily hiring like a developer, without necessarily needing that like technical support. I think Microsoft, for example, has an amazing ecosystem of resellers, for example. For their product, less so like people who are like necessarily deeply integrating into their stack, because it is like a little bit more of a walled garden in some ways.
Not
but
from a productivity
definitely
standpoint,
working with,
right?
I think less so lately,
Sheets,
right? Like
Word.
Yeah, but you imagine like classic productivity suite was very much this like software that you downloaded online or that you like bought in a box, right? And now if you, let's say, go to Dropbox's website, right, you want to edit a Word file, you can actually do that within the Dropbox suite without actually ever having to like download that piece of software, edit it, re-upload it back into Dropbox, which is really nice, right? Yeah. So, Microsoft is making a lot of those kinds of changes to do kind of like live productivity. And I think it's like the difference would be a good example would be like, what's the difference between like Figma and Adobe, right? Also in the productivity suite here. So Figma kind of pioneering this like real-time design collaboration. Compared to Adobe, which was very much like, I'm going to download this software and I'm going to like sit in my corner as a designer and design this by myself, and I will let you know when it's done kind of software, right? And now, Adobe is certainly building much more into the sphere of collaboration and wanting to make that part of their software, right? So I think a lot with collaboration in B2B SaaS, productivity software generally, has been changing by virtue of a lot of new entrants who come into the space and have proven that people actually do want to collaborate and work together, not have what used to be this kind of like stagnant way of working. These files that were versioned and dated and, kind of moved to the back of the drawer type of thing. And so that's a big difference that I've seen. And, I think a lot of players these days have done, a lot of the older school players have done, a great job trying to keep up for sure. But very much, looking at what these kind of new companies are doing in the space.
It seems like the collaboration space has this like renewed effort of attracting generalists versus specialists, and therefore they have to make their software more intuitive, and the rise of low code and no code tools and things like this. And you fall nicely into that category.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, what's your perspective on setting up your company to be a platform? When did Notion kind of decide to invest in that movement?
Sure. Yeah, I think certainly well before I was hired, I had spoken quite a bit to Ivan, our CEO, and Akshay, our COO, about just the power of the ability for all of these developers to be able to kind of contribute to Notion in a new way that they're kind of unable to today. And that being something that has made a pretty big difference in a lot of companies. So I think a great example of this would be Slack, right? Yeah. I was actually, part of the team at Stripe that partnered with Slack when Slack first launched, the ability to create a bot, right? And their entire platform. So I think we were one of like the first 10 integrations. And it was something that was just like super easy, just being able to see like, how much money did you make today pop up in Slack as a business owner. And obviously they've built this entire platform from there that is really powerful for them, right? The fact that I can use all this other software and the messaging medium is Slack itself. And that being something that's really powerful. So I think for us, we want to make sure that when you are a business and you're thinking about, hey, does all of this software work together? Like, we know Notion can't be everything to everyone. And it's really critical that we work with all the different services that you use to run your business. And so for us, it has very much been something we've wanted to do for quite some time. And, I think the only reason why we haven't done it sooner is because we have been just struck by the amount of usage and growth that we've had, and, just the sheer number of like infrastructure upgrades and everything else that we've had to do to kind of keep up with that growth, has slowed us down in some ways. But I think it's hard to balance, like, do you build the platform or do you, make sure your service doesn't fall down? So, for us, it's trying to bring about like more of that, integrity to our infrastructure, and then also, build more things on top of it.
Cool. Whenever you start to look at that kind of next phase, so like, if you talk to Ivan, your CEO, and you're like, hey, we're gonna go to monetization. Have you started to have those conversations? Because I'm sure that's like the holy grail that that would align an executive and convince the board, et cetera, to invest the resources necessary. And potentially the other thing that people don't talk about is that an API can slow down product development, right? If you create a bunch of dependencies here, so it's like, hey, go get all these integrations, but it's like there's kind of like a cost benefit analysis. How are you thinking about that step beyond this step? Because it has to be the long game. You wouldn't just do this just to have it.
Sure. So I think for us, given the position that we're in, where unlike most companies that are at our stage and venture funded, we are a profitable company, and want to continue to be a business that is kind of long term sustainable on its own without having to raise tons of money. And as a result, I think with every feature or product that you release, you want to think about, how is this continuing to lead back to our ability to sustain the business for the long-term future. And so for us, the API is both how do we ensure that people who are maybe not choosing our product today, not paying for it by virtue of the fact they don't have an API, able to get that product and get that feature so that they can buy our service as a whole. So thinking about that as just like a feature that you are adding into a piece of software that is, kind of having everything bundled together. And then, as of course, with lots of APIs, as you mentioned, just thinking about things that could slow us down, wanting to ensure that we have an API where, it is not something that drastically burdens us as a company. And so, thinking about all the protections we can put in place, everything from like API rate limiting so that people are not hitting our API like crazy, especially if they choose to not pay for the product. I think these are a lot of the areas where, especially consumer companies that have launched APIs, have failed. I would say last, making sure that you're very clear about what you want out of the API to the external developers who are going to use it. And so I think for a lot of companies, you are often worried about, well, what if someone takes the API and actually builds something that's like better than our own service? Maybe we shouldn't release this, or maybe we should just drastically limit its features. I think for us, given we are, dealing with people's content, right? People who are like dropping their brains onto our product. We want to ensure that they feel like they have the ability to do what they want with that content. And whether it's like programmatically exporting it to another service, you can easily build exporters that enable you to go from Notion to a competitor. Those are all things that, ultimately we want to enable. We should be the best service because the service itself is great, not because we are artificially restricting the API so that you can't move from one service to another. And so I think a lot of these considerations come up when we think about, how are we monetizing this? How are we making sure that we're giving value? I think it comes down to making sure that people who are using the API are, one, paying for the product, right? And that way the API is a paid feature of a product versus a free feature of a free product. And then two, making sure that those users are getting a lot of value out of the API itself. So that there are, great integrations that they can use off the shelf without a developer. They have the ability to build an integration themselves quite easily, and that the API isn't restrictive. All of those things, I think, will add up into a service that enables our users to really do what they want and, still get us what we need out of the day, which is, the ability to continue to sustain the business, hire really great people, build more into the product, and really deliver for our customers.
So the 6-star experience, I reference this model a lot because of Brian Chesky from Airbnb. He talks about it a lot. Is the final destination here supposed to be where companies or developers, independents, or maybe companies that are actually built on Notion, quote unquote, right? Like, hey, we built a company on top of Notion, where they can have a contained product that you can purchase from an e-commerce perspective. Because like, that's the thing I've really missed in B2B. Like Slack, you kind of can, you can engage with Slack, but they don't really have that marketplace, so to speak, right? But are you thinking about, hey, the experience we want is like, hey, I need to do this in Notion, click buy, it's live?
Yeah, so that already exists today with people effectively building integrations on top of Notion as it stands, or are kind of like hidden unofficial APIs. So I think we are well aware that that's going to be something that kind of continues into the future when we kind of migrate some of those integrations over to the official API once we release it. And that's something that we want to exist, right? We want to be in a place where you can go somewhere, use someone's software, and maybe their software is like completely built off of Notion, right? Like maybe Notion is the database that below which that software exists. And if people want to do that with our software, I think we'd be really excited to see it. So, and if you have your own kind of mechanism of charging for it, et cetera, I think all great, right? I think you have to have the foundational elements of ensuring that what you want people to do with the API is something that is available and contributes both back to Notion and back to our customers at the end of the day. So, for us, I think making sure that people are doing the right thing with the API, like not violating our users' privacy in a way that they shouldn't, not storing data in a way that they shouldn't. Those are, clear ways where I think we want to have a say in what's kind of being done with the ecosystem. But I really do think, we get really excited when there's a service that's built on top of Notion and we see it launch, and a lot of our users are like, oh my gosh, like I've been waiting for this. And, sometimes it's because we haven't built it yet. And so one of the developers out there does. And I think that's okay. I think if people out there are like a little bit ahead of us in terms of our own product development, I think knowing that like we are likely to go in a particular direction, is something that we want to share. We want to be open about. I remember there were several times at Stripe where we would basically see a product that was out there and we were actively working on the same thing internally. And I would, when it made sense, reach out to those partners and say, hey, I know that you're building this, but maybe it would be better if you actually went in this direction instead of in this direction, because if we end up building this and giving it away for free, that's not going to be a really great sustainable business for you. Right. So I think you always have to operate these ecosystems in a way where you are like true to your customers and being honest with developers about kind of where it makes sense for them to build. And I think, we've had, at Stripe, for example, $100 billion plus companies build atop our platform. When you look at like what Shopify has done with Shopify payments built on top of Stripe, and I think that's really powerful. When we can see another company's product and say, wow, like they've been so successful on top of our platform, and that's a good thing. I think if you can look at your platform and see that there's $100 billion company that's been built off of it, that's a success, not something that you should look at and say, oh, well, maybe that could have been us, right?
Yeah, this is when I noticed that we had achieved platform success when I was at HubSpot, when we started seeing these software companies emerge from our platform that had built exclusively tools for HubSpot. And of course, you see that at a larger scale with Shopify and Salesforce and Stripe and Twilio. But that's fantastic that you're seeing that.
Yeah. Whenever you look at those leading indicators of that success, like $100 billion company built on your platform, like, of course, right? Like that's the Rolls Royce, kind of problem. It's like, oh, that could have been us. Salesforce
Stripe's going to be fine.
Salesforce is another one, right? Where there's been a lot of companies built off of, the app exchange that, it ends up becoming an acquisition channel, right? Like it's an acquisition channel for HubSpot. It's an acquisition channel for Salesforce, for Microsoft, right? They're exchanges, so to speak. But kind of taking a different direction, I'm kind of curious, like, what would be a lesson for the partnerships people out there that you took from, your first role at Pulse to Stripe, where it's like, I learned this at Pulse from partnerships, and I absolutely applied that at Stripe. Or a lesson of
So
learning a hard thing. It could be a great thing or a hard thing.
I think I definitely think being the underdog in both companies was definitely something that I took with me. I think, as an example, when I joined Pulse, we were trying to get all of these media companies to give us their content for free. And I was 22. This was my first job out of college. I was trying to get these, much older media executives to give me something that other advertisers pay money to be kind of sitting next to for free. And I think for me, the difficulty there was that, I think combination of age and two, truly not necessarily knowing what I was doing, can be very intimidating when you're up against these like large media conglomerates. And for me, it was an effort of trial and error, knowing that there were like, an endless number of partners that we could work with. And starting off with the partners that were maybe smaller, not as, breaking if you messed up ultimately, and trying to learn from that experience and doing a lot of iteration. So, I feel like I got really good at cold emailing when I was at Pulse, just sending emails to people, trying to guess emails, and then just constantly like tweaking the email once I figured out that there was an email that like worked or that got somebody's attention.
That's actually a really
And
underrated BD skill. Like
yeah,
anyone in partnerships is going to have to reach out cold to people.
you're right.
Like, and most people don't think about that from a partnerships perspective. Like, you got to get good at writing cold emails. What about referrals? That's my trick. Like, I never get into anywhere. Like, I always go through referrals. I find the people that I need to talk to, and then I get them to make the introduction for me.
Yes. Yeah. No, exactly. And like, I would have done that had I known anyone, but
right. Like first, so for those people, the people that are just getting into like, hey, I don't know anyone, new network. It's like, study the best, outbound cold email tactics that there are. Right.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, a lot of what works is thinking about things from the other person's perspective. Like, okay, I am a 40-year-old busy media executive with, 100 emails in my inbox. And I'm thinking about what's next in my career, what's going to make me look good, et cetera, et cetera. And, I want this email to speak to that person. And be that one cold email, every month that they decide to respond to. And so combination of, trial and error and just really thinking about things from the other person's perspective, because if you're just thinking about, why this is going to work for you, the person who's reaching out, it's probably not going to work. So really finding some like mutually beneficial ways for why this person is going to want to do what you want them to do. And that very much translated when I made the move to Stripe, because very similarly, I would talk to people and they were like, oh, like payments company that starts with an S, like, is that Square? And I was like, no, they make the little dongle. We kind of, do something different with like an API, and then you have to explain what an API is. And we were, not a company, like I think we had like less than 100 like real customers when I joined. So you're really at a point where, of course, everyone's heard of like PayPal, for example.
Right.
And so you're trying to like build a name for yourself and describe how like you're different and how you can offer something that this like, giant payments incumbent can't. And so it was very similar. And I think a lot of those skills can really translate if you're willing to kind of test and iterate on what's going to work, because you really don't know what's going to work when you jump into these like new industries with different people and different objectives. And then two, really think about it from the other person's perspective. So
Absolutely. We're gonna go to the kind of final questions here. So the one that I have is like, what was that inflection point from a partnerships perspective at Stripe, where it was like, this is a core tenet of our business, right? So like, obviously you had lots of companies that were built on Stripe, or like Twilio is another, a good modern example of companies using Twilio for SMS, right? But what was that inflection point
yes.
where you were like, this has to be core to everything that we build, to the way that we market, how we treat our customers, et cetera?
Sure. So I think so when I first joined, we had basically launched the OAuth flow on top of the Stripe API. And that was basically our first means with which partners could offer Stripe to their customers
Right.
and become a channel for us. And I think we had signed maybe, 5, 6 deals, and it was like, Squarespace, Shopify, a few others. And they were getting to be a very significant portion of our business. And then there was a certain point where one of our partners, one of our big partners, comes in and says, we're actually like we've going to be like leaving Stripe, and we've signed with another payment provider who's going to allow us to really customize a payment service to the needs of our customers, who are like a little less technical and need a slightly different service. And so we basically talked to that partner and said, we need you to like work your way out of this deal. We will figure out a solution for you. We will build it. And we got them to terminate that deal that they just signed with a competitor, and use the product that we were going to build over the course of the next 6 months instead. And I think the reason that was an inflection point was because it basically completely threw off our engineering roadmap. So everything that we were building and going to do at that point, got pushed back because we needed to completely change course and move in this direction because we didn't want to lose one of these partners. And I think that really told everybody within the company, like, hey, these partners are really important, and they're going to be a significant portion of our growth and our strategy long term. And knowing how big some of these partners have become and how much of Stripe's business they represent, I think it was something that really spoke to the fact that partners can be a really significant value add to a given company and their ecosystem. And that's not true for a lot of companies. I say this all the time, like, there are a lot of companies that are like extremely successful without BD
Right.
people or without partner ecosystems, et cetera. And, I think you want to be a BD professional at a company where partnerships are important. And I think they're only going to be important if they're making up directly or indirectly a significant portion of the company's revenue at the end of the day, right? It has to lead back to that, and be really close to the product development roadmap, and being able to influence that roadmap very directly.
That's such an awesome story and a great point to end it on. And I really want to thank you for hopping in and sharing a lot of these stories today, because Stripe's just such an epic partner, example of like how you can build a platform company. And I know you're going to do awesome things at Notion. And what's really unfair is that like you had to figure this all out on your own. And our hope with this podcast is that we can share some examples, because there's no book for us. There's no blog. There's no like, hey, here's how you build platform ecosystems, channel partnerships. So we want to share this stuff with the world. So don't forget to like, subscribe, find us on YouTube if you're listening to us through your favorite podcast channel. And a quick reminder, this episode is sponsored by Crossbeam. Crossbeam is a partner ecosystem platform that acts as a data escrow service that finds overlapping customers and prospects with your partners while keeping the rest of your data private and secure. So you can sign up for free at crossbeam.com. Kevin's a customer. I'm in a pilot. one of these episodes, they're going to get me. I know they are. But thanks so much, Christina. This was a real honor and treat to have you. And I know our listeners are going to find a lot of value out of it. Where do they find you online if they want it? Do you share BD thoughts on Twitter or anything like that?
I do from time to time. My Twitter handle is CJC.
Okay. All right. Find her there. She's going to be tweeting out some BD wisdom, and great having you on.
Thanks.